Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to have a chance to talk with our good friend Joel Rosenberg and asking some very important questions. What if the Islamic State obtains accidentally weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons and others? And certainly that puts into process his most recent book and another gripping book, The Third Target, which forces the foreign correspondent for the New York Times, J.B. Collins, and the president, Harrison Taylor, and the CIA director, Jack Vaughn, to really begin to address this issue. And it's part of the conversation we're going to have today with Joel Rosenberg. We have information about him, his book, on our website. Of course, a New York Times best-selling author, has written all sorts of books ranging from The Last Jihad and The Copper Scroll and The Tehran Initiative and The 12th Imam, as well as nonfiction books like Epicenter and this latest one, The Third Target. Joel, always great to have you on the program with us here on Point of View.
Great to be with you, Kerby. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Give us an update on your family. I know that you talked about moving to Israel, and I know that certainly you are back and forth all the time anyway, but I thought it would be great for our listeners who have certainly been reading your books for years and appreciating all that you're doing. What's happening in your family right now?
Well, I appreciate that, Kerby. Yes, after many years of traveling in and out of Israel and, of course, setting up a ministry to bless Israel and our neighbors in the name of Jesus, a ministry called the Joshua Fund, the Lord began to tell us a couple of years ago that He was going to move us there, and not just move us to Israel, but He wanted us to become citizens of the state of Israel. And now, I'm Jewish, as you know,
yes,
on my father's side, a Gentile on my mom's side. I'm an evangelical. I believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and I'm excited about that. Honestly, my wife and I thought that it wasn't legally possible to become a citizen of Israel if you are a Jewish person who believes in Jesus, but we hadn't really explored it specifically. But it turns out that that we qualify, and the process went so fast that when we handed in our last bit of paperwork, we had our citizenship in 2 months.
Wow.
Israel is an extraordinary country on many levels, but one of the freedoms and the openness there, even to people who they disagree with, like us, it's really quite extraordinary. And so we moved from Washington, D.C., where we had lived since we got married in 1990. We moved to Israel in August of last year. As you may recall,
right,
that was in the middle of a war with Hamas, and 4,538 rockets and missiles were raining down on our new country, and that's when God decided we should move there. So, but it was a great honor, and the Lord protected us, and we're really thrilled. It's an enormous challenge, learning Hebrew 4 hours a day and so forth, but we're really honored, and it's sort of surreal to think that now we are citizens of a state that God is prophetically rebuilding and drawing Jews back from all countries and all walks of life to be there just as the prophecies say it will happen.
Oh. And again, I want to encourage people to travel to Israel. And I've said before, I was over there when they had the shooting of Yehuda Glick, which is in October. Of course, since then you had the attack on the synagogue. And some of those get so blown out of proportion, of course, not to mention Hamas rockets, that have kept people from going to Israel. And I certainly encourage people to do so. You've done epicenter conferences over there. And I know you would still encourage some of our listeners to make a trip to the Holy Land and to really see where Jesus walked.
Absolutely. In fact, the ministry that we run, the Joshua Fund, is about to announce that we're actually going to do a tour to Israel, and the next one will be in October of 2015. Now, some of your listeners are like, now, you just told me, Joel, that 4,500 rockets were raining down on the country. You want us to take a tour there? And the answer is yes. And, of course, if there's a war, you'll get your money back 100%. We get that. But what's extraordinary is how safe Israel really is. And I know that sounds funny, but let me give you an anecdote. When we were about to move and leave for Israel last August, I was on a radio station in Chicago, and the host was asking me, how can you move there? It's so dangerous. You're crazy. I said, you live in Chicago.
Yes.
I mean, do you hear yourself? I mean, last weekend, 30 people were murdered in your city. Now, in the entire war with Hamas, only 8 Israeli civilians were killed. Now, it's horrible for those 8, but if you think about the context of a modern American city and what it goes through on a given week or month, God is protecting Israel in an amazing way. One other anecdote is I met with the guy who was the architect of the Iron Dome rocket defense system in Israel.
Yes. Fascinating.
I've seen it in action. It has saved my life. That's how I've seen it that close. But I asked him, don't the Americans have a system like this? And he said, you guys do. It's called the Vulcan Phalanx. It's 20% effective. I said, what's the Iron Dome system's success rate? He said 90%. Now, Kerby, I know that the Israelis are good with technology, but so are Americans. Mm-hmm. I think there's a God factor in there significantly. And I say all that to say, God, if God wants you to come and visit and pray for Israel and her neighbors, then I would encourage you to do it and just trust Him. And at least you get to go home, The Lord has us in there for the long term.
I might just mention that we have links to the joshuafund.com and, of course, joerosenberg.com, and so you can find some of those links, and we'll continue to talk about that. And, of course, this new book out, The Third Target. As always, since it's a fictional book, I won't give away all the plot, but I've got enough to understand that it could just be ripped out of the headlines tomorrow. And so often you've written about things, Joel, that sort of almost look prophetic, but it doesn't take just a whole lot of prophetic insight to say, what if ISIS stumbled on some chemical weapons, and now you have a situation where this apocalyptic, radical Islamic group now is beginning to threaten world peace?
Well, that's right, and again, I won't give it all away either. But you're right. It's about a New York Times correspondent who hears a rumor that ISIS has captured these chemical weapons in Syria, and so any reporter can't print that unless he can confirm it. So he asks his editor if he can go into Syria and interview the ISIS commander. His editor says, "No, are you crazy? There's 200 journalists have been murdered. Absolutely not." And the reporter and his colleagues sneak into Syria anyway. And throughout the course of the book, they're really hunting for two answers to two questions. Number one, does ISIS really have these genocidal weapons? And number two, if so, who are they going to attack? We know in real life that ISIS is trying to bring down the government of Syria. Mm-hmm. ISIS is trying to bring down the government of Iraq. So the question is, what is the next target? What is the third target? Is ISIS going to attack the United States? Is it going to attack Israel or Europe or some moderate Arab country in the Middle East? That's the question inside the novel.
We'll Take a break and talk a little bit more about the novel, but also about Middle East and some of the reasons we need to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, let me suggest that you take some time to read his letter from a Birmingham jail. If you're young, I think it will give you a better idea of what the civil rights movement in the 1960s was all about. If you're older, it will remind you of some very important events and chapters in American history. I realize that it will take some time to read his letter. When I printed it out, it was more than 10 pages and runs nearly 7,000 words. He wrote it in response to a published statement by 8 clergymen, and it was written in the margins of a newspaper, later on scraps of paper, and finally on a pad his attorney left for him. He answers his critics about his tactics during the civil rights movement and then makes his case for his nonviolent campaign. To those who call his action untimely, he reminds them of what it is like to be a black person in America that has seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim. He also deals with the controversial issue of just laws and unjust laws. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. Finally, he addresses the responsibility of the church. He notices that the church of the early Christians was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transforms the mores of society. And when they were commanded to do something contrary to the Bible, they said they were called to obey God rather than man. This is a reference to Acts 5:29. As you read his letter, remember that he wrote it when he was 34 years of age and in jail. Ask yourself how many people you know, pastors, professors, activists, who could write with such intellect and such passion. This letter by Martin Luther King Jr. is worth reading, and I trust you will consider doing so today. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Joel Rosenberg as we talk about his book, The Third Target. Some incredibly high praise from people like Porter Goss, who was the former director of the CIA, and of course General Jerry Boykin, who was the former commander of Delta Force. Reza Kahili's been on the program with us before, a former CIA operative, and Steve Forbes, to mention just a few. And again, you can find this book in your local bookstore, but we also have information about it on our website, and of course a link to Joel Rosenberg's website and a book trailer so that you can watch that. I'd encourage you to click the button, put it maybe on your Facebook page, and educate others about these issues. And Joel, you were talking about that third target. They know what the first two would be, but that's, of course, the big question mark in the novel, isn't it?
It is, because, again, most people don't fully, most people have not been paying attention to ISIS. The president himself said just a year ago, in January of 2014, that ISIS was not a serious threat. It was a JV squad.
Yes.
We've learned, he has, and we all have since then, that they are a major force. Now, but people don't fully realize that ISIS is the one that's trying to bring down the government of Syria and bring down the government of Iraq. The key to understanding them is understanding their name. ISIS is Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham. Now, that's a little challenging because it's a little bit of English and Arabic. Al-Sham is a term in Arabic that we would use the term the Levant.
Right.
Now, some of your listeners are like, the Levant, that's not helping me. Exactly, because that's French. And we don't have a term in English that for the region that's described as Al-Sham in Arabic or the Levant. But basically, it's Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel.
Israel, there it is, yes.
And so ISIS or ISIL, those are interchangeable names. Now they've decided, you know what, we don't just want that territory. We actually want a kingdom that takes over the entire Middle East and eventually the world. We want to raise our black flag of Daesh over the White House. So now they've called themselves just the Islamic State. They're creating a kingdom or a caliphate, and they're incredibly dangerous, and they are willing to behead, crucify, enslave, slaughter anybody that gets in their way, and they are much more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. In fact, Al-Qaeda, as you know, Kerby, in recent weeks has denounced ISIS for being too radical. Now, when you've entered a world in which Al-Qaeda is posing as the moderate, we've entered a bizarre universe where even Al-Qaeda thinks that the ISIS boys are just savages, and they are. One pastor that we support through the Joshua Fund, helping both Christians and Muslims in northern Iraq who are on the run for their very lives from ISIS, he told me in a phone conversation a couple months ago, he said, you have to understand, Joel, ISIS is not simply trying to terrorize people. When they cut off heads, they are doing blood sacrifices to their God. He said, this is a demonic, satanic movement, and unless the West wakes up and deals with it decisively, crushes it, you can't contain it in the Middle East. It's coming to America. It's coming to Europe. That's really why I wrote The Third Target, not simply to sort of keep people all up all night with a high-speed, high-octane thriller, but to warn, to educate, to provoke people to see a danger that is coming up even faster than I had anticipated when I started to write the book.
I see a little bit of a correlation between this book and the previous one, The 12th Imam, because remember when we talked about the 12th Imam and the idea of the Mahdi and what was happening in Iran and the fact that the West sort of minimized the apocalyptic vision that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and others had. The same sort of thing has happened with ISIS. They have sort of an apocalyptic vision as well. And as you just pointed out, the president sort of minimized the impact of the Islamic State. And both of those are motivated by theology that I think many of us in the West don't really understand, or at least some of our leaders don't seem to understand.
That's exactly right, Kerby. And the difference between Shia radical apocalyptic theology in Iran and the Sunni version that's being practiced by the radicals of ISIS is that the ISIS team has decided not to wait. Mm-hmm. They are not waiting for the caliphate to come. They're not waiting for the Messiah to come. They are deciding to rob, kill, and destroy now and build that kingdom now, even before they get chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, where the Shias of Tehran, they are waiting. They're certainly fomenting, radical terrorism all around the world, but they have decided to build nuclear weapons and not launch their apocalyptic war until they get those weapons. And that's why ISIS has moved so fast. But it's a very similar end-of-the-world type theology or eschatology that's driving ISIS. It's just that it's driving them in the here and now, and they are not waiting for weapons of mass destruction.
We are talking about, of course, what is happening right now in Syria and Iraq, but this is close to Turkey, and Turkey has changed dramatically. The rise of Turkey, first of all, from a country that at one time was seen kind of as a European country. It is a NATO country, and it one time looked like it might have been a member of the European Union. It doesn't look like that any longer under Durgan and others. This is a remarkable switch that has happened even in a neighboring country, right?
That's right. Turkey is the modern model of moderate Islam. I mean, after being than 400 years. That Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Caliphate, was of course defeated in the 1920s during World War I. And what rose after it was a leader named Kemal Ataturk,
right?
And he was the father of modern Turkey. And he decided, no, we're going to be Muslims, but we're going to be sane, rational, moderate. We're going to build businesses and a stable society. We want to tie ourselves to Europe. They never did join the EU. The EU turned them down, but they did join NATO.
Yeah.
They're currently a NATO ally.
It's hard to believe under Erdogan
and
now.
Yet, exactly. Erdogan has taken this country in such a radical direction in just the last, 5 or 6 years. It's a horrific situation. Turkey, which I've been to many times, I love that country. It's beautiful. I'm just so saddened. It's a country that where the gospel has not been preached well. It's a country where all the dead churches of Revelation were there, and yet it doesn't have a vibrant Christian community, sadly. But it is turning to be the harboring, respite, the haven for radical Islamic terror groups. Hamas has headquarters there. Other terrorist groups are headquartering now in Turkey, and it's a very dangerous development. And it's the split between radical Sunnis and a whole nother brand of moderate Sunnis, like King Abdullah in Jordan, President al-Sisi in Cairo. Something is happening where there's a split emerging, and actually the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Israelis are quietly forming an alliance with the Saudis and some of the Gulf Emirates in an alliance, quiet, they don't advertise it a lot, against two radical forces. The radical Shias in Iran that are building the nuclear weapons, and the radical Sunnis of ISIS, and including Turkey now. So that is an interesting dynamic, and yet President Obama has terrible relationships with Israel and with the government in Egypt. And, so not particularly warm, not particularly bad relationship with Jordan. And right at the moment when the president really should be standing with Netanyahu, King Abdullah, and President al-Sisi as the bulwark of an extraordinary development against these two radical and very dangerous forces.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of those southern kingdoms, if you will. Of course, there's some prophetic significance when we look in the book of Revelation and in Daniel and Isaiah and other passages in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So we'll take a break, but we do encourage you, even during the break, to go to our website, pointofview.net. We have a link to joelrosenberg.com as well as the Joshua Fund and information about the book. We have a book trailer there for you to watch and then maybe to click the share button and share with others. But again, if you are not familiar, this new book out, The Third Target, and we're learning a lot more about ISIS and about some of the threats in the Middle East. And so you should be able to find the book in your local bookstore. If not, we do have a link there for you to order it as well, and we do commend it to you. It's gripping, it will get your attention, but it will also educate you on some of the things happening in the news right now. Joel Rosenberg with us. We'll take a break and come back with more with him right after this.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone or write a check or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Joel Rosenberg as we talk about his book, The Third Target, as well as what is happening in the Middle East. And Joel, just before we get into that Southern Kingdom and alliance and all the things happening in Egypt, I always like to use kind of this particular point at time to talk about all the resources that are available at your website. And it's going to take you a few minutes because you have books and DVDs and a blog. Of course, you have the Joshua Fund, you have the trips and everything. But for just a minute, talk with us about what individuals, as they go to your website, can find and some of the resources that you're making available.
Well, you just very graciously went through them. You're right. You go to joelrosenberg.com, and first, of course, is all the details about the books. A lot of the major interviews we do, we can't put all of them up there, but we put a lot of them. For example, if you guys get us the audio for this, we'll put it in the podcast so people can keep track of that. You know, one of the biggest challenges I find from my readers is if they want to hear me on an interview, but it's not in their area or they missed it, then, you know, in the old days, there was no way for them to connect. But now we're trying to keep that in our own podcast system as well as television interviews. So you can find all that and, of course, find the resources directly to the books. But then we also have the connection to the blog. And I'm usually every day, almost every day, sometimes several times a day, if news is moving quickly, updating people on what's happening in the Middle East, in the epicenter, why it matters. Not just the bad news. I also want to write about what is God doing and how more Muslims are coming to Christ than ever before, how more Jews are coming to faith in Jesus than ever before. So there's good news as well as the difficult trend lines. Of course, we do have links to my email, but the blog also, you can sign up for what's called an RSS feed, meaning if you go to the blog, which is connected to the website, you'll see a spot there, and you can just sign up. You would then get every single blog posting. Now, that's too much information for some, but it's not nearly enough for others, so you sort of have to regulate. What I call flash traffic is my email that goes out, you know, about once a week.
Sure, I see
sometimes
that.
Twice if things are happening a lot. But I don't send out everything in the email. That's a more, you know, sporadic connection. And then, of course, there's a link to the Joshua Fund, and that's our ministry to do both humanitarian relief and Bible teaching and encouragement of pastors and spreading of the gospel throughout the Middle East, including in Israel, but also in Iraq right now, where we are providing 13,000 winter coats for people fleeing from ISIS but encountering dangerous winter weather. We're providing audio Bibles so that these refugees running from ISIS can listen to the Bible, to the New Testament in Arabic or in Kurdish. We're partnering with Franklin Graham and Samaritan's Purse. We're partnering with local churches on the ground. And so those are the types of things that the ministry invests in. And if people don't want to just read or think about what's happening there, but really want to make a difference, we need your prayers, and we would love for you to get involved financially in the Joshua Fund.
Oh, just some great opportunities. Let's get back to some of the things you said just a minute ago. And when you think about Egypt, what a difference. First, the Arab Spring, which turned out to really be an Islamic winter. Then you have Morsi in power. Then he's ousted. This has been a country in turmoil. But as you've said, developing alliances with Saudi Arabia and others really to hopefully push back against some of the radicalization that they have seen in Syria and Turkey, as well as in Iran.
You're absolutely right, Kerby. And I have to say, in about the 10 days now, I've been doing interviews for the Third Target. You're the first interviewer that has asked me sort of the prophetic angle of what's happening there. And I'd appreciate that because there are two countries that right now are led by people who are real allies of the United States. They're not perfect, and they don't know Jesus, but they're good allies.
Yes.
One is President al-Sisi in Egypt, who just gave a major speech the other day in which he was speaking to the Islamic leaders of his country, and he told them, you must revolutionize Islam. You must reform it.
Yes.
We cannot have an Islamic world where everyone thinks that we're a bunch of killers. You guys have to change it. Now, he said it respectfully, but he said it boldly, And we haven't seen a lot of leaders in the world, the Muslim world, ever say that. And this is a president in Egypt who President Obama is opposed to.
I know.
Okay, that's one.
Mm-hmm.
So the other one is King Abdullah the second, who's the king of Jordan. Both these countries have peace treaties with Israel. Both of them are natural allies and long-term allies of the United States, measured in half century or so. But and Abdullah, the king, is also not only pushing back against the radicals in terms of using military force to attack ISIS, but he's also theologically trying to deconstruct the arguments of the enemy from an Islamic perspective. He's a descendant of Muhammad. Now, the reason that's important is because we don't know how much longer these two guys, these two men, these two leaders will be in power. Bible prophecy indicates things go very badly for the people living in the country we now know as Jordan, but in the Bible terminology is Ammon, Moab, and Edom. The judgments come, and really a lot of destruction and apocalyptic events happen in Jordan at some point in the last days. And Egypt, in Isaiah 19, we read, goes through a tremendous time of suffering. A cruel master comes and takes over and really crushes the people. But in that, God allows the people of Egypt to suffer. Why? The text tells us in Isaiah 19, so they turn to the Lord.
Yes.
And eventually the Lord says he sends a champion to them. He sends a Savior to them. He sends Jesus to them, and they turn to Christ deep into the end times. So we don't know exactly when and how these events will play out, but it's important that we use the open door while we have it, both to strengthen these leaders geopolitically against the radicals, but also to preach the gospel and strengthen the church and make disciples in these countries because there's openness now that will not be there at some point in the not-too-distant future.
So glad you mentioned Isaiah 19, because I've heard from people that have been in Egypt that they really kind of believe in that verse. And if you were to go out on the street or go into a church where people knew even something about prophecy and say, what are some verses that deal with prophecy? They'd say, well, the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation, probably Matthew 24, maybe Ezekiel 38, 39. If they knew that many, they probably wouldn't have picked up Isaiah 19, but they certainly believe that that is happening. And it's interesting because obviously Israel is mentioned more in the Bible than anything else, but Egypt is mentioned a lot as well, and you wonder if there's a plan for God in that country. Of course, is there a plan for everybody around the world? So I thought it was interesting that you brought that up. Let's just, before I forget, though, I mentioned Ezekiel 38 and 39, and when you look at those names, obviously some of them don't mean anything. Gog and Magog and Meshach and Tubal, and, Persia, okay, I understand that's Iran, Cush, Put. But when you go and follow the table of nations, as we've done with you before, you recognize that it sort of is describing the interesting alliances that have been developing right there in the Middle East.
Absolutely right, Kerby. You couldn't have put it better. When you look at the current well, first of all, you have to look at the historic detective work that, in terms of understanding what the ancient names mean. And when you do that, and I did that in my book, Epicenter,
right,
a nonfiction book, as you recall.
Very good book.
Thank you. We learned that Magog is a territory north of the Black Sea, north of the Caspian Sea, in the region we now call Russia and perhaps some of the former Soviet republics. So that'll be the main enemy of Israel as we go deeper into the last days until we get to the rise of Babylon. That's a separate prophecy. But the rise of Magog and a leader known as Gog, that's a title, not a name, that's Russia and some of its northern allies. Then you have Gomer. Now, I have to remind people that's not where Gomer Pyle is from. That is the country we know today as Turkey. Now, you and I just talked about how dangerous Turkey is becoming after being a friend of the United States, a friend of the West, a NATO ally, hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking cheap and beautiful vacations there. And now it's an enemy, and a hardcore enemy at that. That is consistent with countries that are not in the alliance. Sheba and Dedan are indicated as not part of the countries, mainly what we would now know as Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. It's very interesting, and they their argument against the leader of Russia and Iran, they say, why are you coming? Are you coming for plunder? Are you coming for economic reasons? Very interesting, the dynamic. Can't say that we're seeing fulfillment, but the trend lines are very intriguing.
We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Joe Rosenberg as we talk about his book, The Third Target, and certainly it is a book that you will want to read and follow the exploits of New York Times reporter J.B. Collins and some of the intrigue there as well. But we were talking about what was in Ezekiel 38 and 39. It brings me back to some of your earlier books like the Ezekiel Option and the Tehran Initiative. Here you talk about Russia or Magog having any kind of alliance with Persia or Iran. For our younger listeners out there, I have to tell them, those of us that are a little older, there was a time when that was hard to imagine. Another one is Put, which is Libya. To think that there would have been any kind of relationship between Russia and Libya is kind of straining credibility, and yet we are seeing some of those alliances coming together. They may not be a fulfillment of all the prophecies, but as you said, we see the trend lines heading in that direction, don't we?
We absolutely do. And just starting with the relationship between Russia and Iran, I mean, there hasn't been one in the 2,500 years since the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel wrote that prophecy when he was living in captivity in Iraq. And in fact, Russia wasn't even a country back then, so Persia, of course, was. But now, just really in the last 15 to 20 years have we begun to see ties between Russia and Iran, and they really accelerated under the rise of Vladimir Putin as the strongman in Moscow. And the Russian defense minister is actually heading to Iran in the next couple of days. This alliance has really deepened, and that is a prerequisite for the war of Gog and Magog to happen. That Gog, the leader of Russia, needs to be. God says to him, "Get ready, be prepared." Well, this again, I can't. People have asked me, "Is Vladimir Putin the biblical character Gog?" And my answer is, I don't know. He's Gog-esque. He certainly fits the bill, but it's too early to say. But we're seeing this alliance form, and it's forming with Turkey. And just a few years ago, when I wrote Epicenter, people said, "No, Turkey is a friend. It's never going to change." And the other prerequisite for that to happen is, of course, Israel has to be reborn as a country,
right.
And Jews have to come back. Well, those are the most dramatic end times prophecies that have happened in our lifetime. And now, of course, I'm part of that because we, as a Jewish family, have moved to Israel and become citizens because the Lord told us. And because we're there, Kerby, I wonder sometimes, are we going to see the fulfillment of some of these other major prophecies, in my lifetime? I don't know, but I'm sort of buckling up, and I think it's going to get much, much darker in the world over the next few years, and particularly in my part of the world. And one of the reasons I write these novels and speak and travel is to mobilize and educate Christians to pray.
Yes.
War and trauma is shaking people out of their religious and ideological and philosophical beliefs that anything but Jesus will save them. That's why God's allowing Satan to rob, kill, and destroy, so that Jesus can come and give them life and give it abundantly, as he promised in John 10:10. So, and the tribulation is an entire story of where God allows Satan to do great evil so that people will turn away from everything else and turn to Jesus for salvation and him alone. And we're not into the tribulation. Christians are suffering terribly, and we in the West, we must pray for them. We must give to ministries that are helping. We cannot turn a blind eye any more than the Christians of Europe turned a blind eye to the Holocaust and did so to their great regret.
Let me just mention that really just quickly in passing, because certainly the rebirth of Israel and certainly the things we've seen in Daniel and Isaiah, Ezekiel and others, but this rise of global anti-Semitism. I mean, I've understood now that there are more Jews leaving France than any other country. I think Ukraine is second. And we've seen this anti-Semitism. So it isn't just, of course, that some anti-Semitism has existed, but this is like a global anti-Semitism that's just almost irrational. And it seems to me that might be one more fulfillment of prophecy.
It is. We are seeing the worst levels of anti-Semitism since World War II and the Holocaust. So we're sort of back in 1930s era anti-Semitism in Europe. France has the largest number of Jews in all of Europe, 475,000. But the head of the Jewish Agency, an old friend of mine, Natan Sharansky, he said recently that 50,000 French Jews last year inquired about how to move to Israel and become citizens. 7,000 made the move, but there's enormous growing preparation of Jews in Europe to leave and come to Israel. And, of course, the prophecies tell us in Ezekiel 36, for example, that God will not allow any Jews to remain outside of Israel eventually. He's drawing all of us back on his own timetable. Some of us come willingly and obediently. Some of us get driven out of our countries because of anti-Semitism. But either way, God's prophecies will come to pass.
Let me again encourage our listeners to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, Psalm 122, and in particular pray for your family that has moved there. And I wanted to start the program with that and end it as well, and encourage people to join with you in that tour of Israel and to fund and provide resources through the Joshua Fund, and to go to joelrosenberg.com and find out a little bit more. It is always a delight to have you on the program, and congratulations on all of your books, but especially this newest one, The Third Target. It is just great, and I appreciate you giving us some time today, Joel, on the program Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you for drawing that attention, and we will take all those prayers that we can get. We need them, as do all the Christians of the Middle East.
We will take a break, and we'll come back and talk about some other issues, but I hope you appreciated the conversation today with Joel Rosenberg. Lots of great resources that we certainly course, is the rebirth of the nation of Israel. The other day, we spent some time talking about rebuilding the Jewish temple that people are talking about, threat to the countries of Syria and Iraq, but also the threat even to Israel as well. And so certainly those were some very significant factors that we talked about. Of Turkey and these other of the rise of global anti-Semitism. So lots that we can see, and certainly a great deal that we can learn from the book by Joel Rosenberg. So again, take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. We have the book. If you would like to order it there, you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. We have the trailer, which I would encourage you to watch, to think about in terms of how you might want to click on that share button and send it by email to someone, or maybe put it on your Facebook page. It will get some conversation going, and it could be a great evangelistic opportunity. And then, of course, you might want to click on the link there to the Joshua Fund. Many times people say, well, what can I do to help people in the Middle East? And we've already talked about how this can be a blessing to Israel and to the neighbors, and how they're providing coats to those in Iraq during the winter, food, clothing, shelter, but as well Bible teaching. So again, all of it available at our website, or you can go directly to joelrosenberg.com. Either way, you'll find those resources there. We're going to take a break, but we do encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. You'll see my viewpoint section there. You'll see the Take Action section. And, of course, we have posted a number of videos, which I would encourage you to watch and to use in your ministry. Let's take a break. We'll continue with our conversation, but I hope you appreciated our conversation with Joel Rosenberg in the first hour. We'll be back with more right after this.
The Point of View radio talk show is broadcast 2 hours each day, but you can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. There you'll also be among the first to see our new videos, Uncensored, a series highlighting issues impacting this generation and the next. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. @Point of View RTS. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Together, let's go viral. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about Martin Luther King Day. That is the day today. And in the first hour, of course, we had a chance to hear from Joel Rosenberg, but I wanted to get back into the news and give you a chance, as we open up the phones, to comment on a number of issues. Of course, it's Martin Luther King Day, and it also, of course, coincides with the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, so we may talk a little bit about that. But we're also going to take you back to 1963, the letter from Birmingham jail. If you get my daily commentary, that is my commentary today on this. A lot of people have been writing about some of the similar kinds of topics. John Stonestreet today, his Breakpoint commentary, The Most Segregated Hour. And then, of course, we've had Alveda King on the program before. Racism has not been erased. So there are lots of things that we can certainly focus on this hour. And as we open up the phones, certainly do to the microphone. An individual's been with us before. Ed Gilbreath is the author of Reconciliation Blues and a newer book that came out this last year, Birmingham Revolution, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Epic Challenge to the Church. There's also an ebook that goes with that, Remembering Birmingham. He has served for many years as an editor-at-large for Christianity Today. He's an award-winning journalist and also executive director of communications for the Evangelical Covenant Church and founding editor of the Urban Ministries online magazine, Urban Faith. Has really been able to address lots of very important issues. So, Ed, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thank you. It's great to be back, Kerby.
One of the things I'd love to spend some time talking about, of course, is the feature in your book, which is published by InterVarsity Press, and we have information about Reconciliation Blues as well as Birmingham Revolution, is this whole letter that Martin Luther King wrote back in April 1963. And I guess we need to sort of set the scene a little bit. And I've encouraged our listeners in my commentary to read it. Now, it's going to take them some time because it's about 7,000 words.
Right.
And if you print it out in long form, about 10 pages, I took today to print it out on some smaller font and got it down to 8 pages. But it will take a while. But it is amazing to me that writing this from jail, in a response to a published statement by clergymen. I mean, it was written in the margins of newspaper, scraps of paper, kind of a notepad and things like that. If you were to get some of the brightest people we have, put them in jail for a while and just hardly even give them a computer, I don't think they'd come up with something as eloquent as the letter from Birmingham jail. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with you. I think that it was a prophetic moment, and it was a combination of many things coming together at the right time for Dr. King to be able to write that letter at that moment. It was really an overflow of a lot of different things. Emotion, certainly. He was angry. He was frustrated with the response that he was getting from some of the local clergymen in Birmingham. And as you know, as you said, the letter was actually a direct response to an open letter that appeared in the local newspaper from 8 white clergymen in Birmingham who, although they supported the aims of the civil rights movement, they were against Dr. King coming to Birmingham. They looked at him as an outsider, and they felt that his presence there to protest the segregation laws would cause more problems than good. And they felt that if the black community could just wait a little longer, things might take a turn for the better without King coming and stirring things up and potentially leading to violent reactions and things like that. King read this open letter, and he was very disappointed. He was hurt, and he was angry. He was in jail already for having broken the local laws of protesting on the streets of Birmingham. And as he sat in solitary confinement in this dark jail cell, he just felt hurt and began to feel that he needed to respond to these clergymen. So, as you said, he began scribbling in the margins of that newspaper. He began writing on whatever scraps of paper he can find. Some say he even had to pick up some toilet paper to finish writing some of his thoughts down. And what he wrote was this eloquent sort of defense of first of all, the movement's presence in Birmingham, but also the need for the church to be a proponent of justice. And the fact that, in his words, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that the black community could wait no longer. They needed to take a stand. And that he could not remain silent in Atlanta while this injustice was happening in Birmingham. So he felt he had a reason to be there at that time.
One of the things I'm struck by, first of all, of course, he wrote this when he was 34 years of age. Again, tell me how many 34-year-olds could write something like this, but that's another story. But again, with how things have changed, because even today, John Stonestreet said, he says, I dare say that secularist gatekeepers today would quickly dismiss many a line from Martin Luther King Jr. as fundamentalist and theocratic if they didn't know who said it. You almost have to be somewhat biblically literate, that is, and really understand some context of the scriptures to understand some of his arguments, because he's making a case for a just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law and the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. Then he talks about obeying God rather than men. Well, that's a reference to Acts 5:29. I would think that if you had never read the Bible or had never been in church and you tried to read the letter, a fair amount of it might not even make sense. Don't you think, Ed?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was drawing on a deep well of theological thought, of philosophy, of U.S. and world history, quoting from St. Augustine, from Plato. He had a photographic memory in many ways, and he was just pulling all of these arguments together. This was his, driven by that anger that he was feeling. This was sort of his comprehensive statement on the church's call to be an agent of justice and reconciliation, and what that looked like, both theologically and politically, and all of these things together. So it was a powerful statement that could only be made by someone like him, drawing on, first of all, the two sort of, I would say, absolutes that he operated by. Number one, the humanity of all men and women, that every human being had dignity and worth and was created in the image of God. And because of that, the oppression and the dehumanization that the African American community was facing in the South during that time was just totally wrong. It had to be confronted. And the second absolute being that the change had to come about in a peaceful, nonviolent manner, passive, resistance. So it led to lots of ugly confrontations, but the aggressors were the local authorities, the police. But for King, the reaction had to be one of nonviolence and peace. These two things drove him and sort of drove the movement at that time. And it was all really rooted in a Christian ethic.
Sure. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. And if you'd like to join our conversation today, certainly we will open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. But we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the role of the church, because not only was Dr. King critical of some of these clergymen, but he was also making really a challenge to the church. Is the church a thermometer, or is the church a thermostat? We'll talk about that right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, let me suggest that you take some time to read his letter from a Birmingham jail. If you're young, I think it will give you a better idea of what the civil rights movement in the 1960s was all about. If you're older, it will remind you of some very important events and chapters in American history. I realize that it will take some time to read his letter. When I printed it out, it was more than 10 pages, runs nearly 7,000 words. He wrote it in response to a published statement by 8 clergymen, and it was written in the margins of a newspaper, later on scraps of paper, and finally on a pad his attorney left for him. He answers his critics about his tactics during the civil rights movement and then makes his case for his nonviolent campaign. To those who call his action untimely, he reminds them of what it is like to be a black person in America that has seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim. He also deals with the controversial issue of just laws and unjust laws. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. Finally, he addresses the responsibility of the church. He notices that the church of the early Christians was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transforms the mores of society. And when they were commanded to do something contrary to the Bible, they said they were called to obey God rather than man. This is a reference to Acts 5:29. As you read his letter, remember that he wrote it when he was 34 years of age and in jail. Ask yourself how many people you know, pastors, professors, activists, who could write with such intellect and such passion. This letter by Martin Luther King Jr. is worth reading, and I trust you will consider doing so today. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Martin Luther King Day. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. What are your thoughts about the battle for civil rights? We'd love to get your phone calls. We'll take those in just a few minutes. 1-800-351-1212. Ed Gilbreath with us as we talk about certainly his most recent book, Birmingham Revolution, but of course in the past, Reconciliation Blues and some other resources. We have a link to his website. We have information about some of the books, and we have a video for you to watch as well, and we encourage you to watch that video. Maybe click the share button, put it on your Facebook page, and start a conversation today. Well, Ed, let me come back to you. Is the church a thermometer that just records the temperature, or should the church be a thermostat that changes the temperature?
Well, obviously, I believe the latter, and I believe Dr. King believed the latter as well.
Sure.
But I think we also realize that as fallen human beings, that we're often given to following the lead of the culture and of society rather than being a counterculture for Christ, which I believe we're called to be. And unfortunately, that has been manifest, especially in the situation during the period of segregation in our country, and prior to that, slavery, of course. But it's been reflected in the church's attitudes as well. And this is one thing that Dr. King faced: a church that was not altogether in tune with what he believed was the call to justice and the call to see each individual as made in the image of God. So you saw this sort of mixed message coming from the church, some who actually did believe that, and others who felt that they had a divine call to oppose integration and of any form. And King even faced opposition from some in the black church, those who felt that he was too much of a rabble-rouser, or those who had become sort of complacent and comfortable in their positions in society, albeit an unequal position. They felt like they had a pretty good thing going, and for King to come in and to shine a light on these things could disturb what they had going on. So King was getting it from all sides, from a white Southern church, an evangelical church that held at that time very racist views, from a black church who was content to just allow the status quo to continue, and in the case of the 8 white clergymen, those who supported him but felt that his tactics were moving too fast and that he needed to slow down. The church was never quite in step. Yet King knew that the church was the only true instrument, an institution that could bring about the holistic change that needed to happen, that could speak to the morals of America and speak to the soul and change from that standpoint the laws and the attitudes.
One of the things that you talk about in your book is that it was sort of his Wittenberg moment because, he, of course, name was Martin Luther in Wittenberg in 1517, but he said he was in Birmingham because injustice is here. And this has led, I guess, Ed, to the big speculation right now as to whether or not if Martin Luther King Jr. were alive today, would he be in Ferguson? Would he be in some of these marches? And his niece, of course, Alveda King, said, well, he might be there, but he would certainly be calling for individuals to practice nonviolence. And that was a significant part of his letter to the clergy, that we are going to overcome evil with good. We're going to overcome injustice with righteousness. And that seems to be missing a little bit today in some of these marches, don't you think?
Absolutely. One of his famous quotes, of course, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And I think he would be heartbroken at some of the unfortunate eruptions of violence that have happened around the protests. I think he was heartbroken during his lifetime at some of the more militant factions of the movement that led to violent situations. But at the same time, I think he understood on a deep level the pain and the frustration and the angst, the discontent that many were facing, and in many ways he found himself sort of caught in between and trying to be an interpreter of sorts for the different sides, to help the white community understand that deep pain and frustration that the African American community was experiencing, and to help the black community understand that they needed to embrace peaceful and nonviolent methods in order to be understood and heard. I think that's always been the role of a prophet in many ways, being sort of caught in the middle, and King definitely found himself at that point.
In your book, you talk about the question that he had: what do you do when the law is against you? If it's an unjust law, really you're not commanded to obey an unjust law. And in Jim Crow South, that was the case. We're in a little different situation today in that, you have the Voting Rights Act, you have the Civil Rights Act, you have all attempts to eliminate any aspect of Jim Crow. Yet, as soon as I open up the phones, we're going to have, and I think legitimately so, people saying, but I still face racism. How do you address it, since it isn't as easy to identify as it, say, was in Martin Luther King Jr.'s day with Jim Crow laws? And how would you suggest that we as the church respond?
Yeah, whoa. Do we have another couple hours? That's
I know, I set you up for a long question and a long answer, but that's okay. We've got some time, so let's work it through.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, we have to be sensitive, and let me just start by saying, I think as a society, as a nation, we've become very cynical about the whole idea of race, and some of us would deny that race plays any role in how things operate today. That, as you said, we've made so much progress. Laws have been put in place. We even have a black president. So things are all good. We've moved beyond that. And just to bring up the idea of race makes you a racist. And so we're facing that on the one hand, and we're also facing a situation where people are tired. They're frustrated. They feel like they've been voiceless, and like we've sort of gone through this again and again. And then you see situations like surrounding the Trayvon Martin in tragedy, or Ferguson, or New York, where you have these eruptions of anger and rage and protest built around things. Of folks who feel like it's just we're just in this continuing cycle, and I think it's imperative that the church be in tune with both sides of the attitudes on this, and try to get the pulse of why people think the way that they do. To understand, not just to label and stereotype the reactions and the pain that they see coming from certain folks in the black community, but to ask themselves, what is that about? What led to that? And to take it seriously. And on the other hand, I think for those of us who are committed to racial reconciliation and want to see unity not only in the church but in society, we need to be not only eager and quick to make our position known, but we need to take a posture of listening and understanding why certain folks don't feel that it's a problem anymore, or why they feel that there are certain things being taken advantage of, and folks are not taking personal responsibility. We don't hear each other, and as a culture, I think that's always going to leave us in this state of discombobulation, and really hitting the repeat button over and over again with these situations of rage in communities or political discontent. We need, as a church, to model true listening and true love for our neighbor. And I know that sounds very elementary and basic, but I'm not sure we've really taken seriously the idea of what it means to love our neighbor. If we really take that seriously, what does that mean for listening? What does that mean for spending time to understand our history and where we've come from and how things have arrived at the way they are? What does that mean? It's a major thing, but it'll take a lot longer to talk about.
We'll take a break and we'll talk a little bit more about it. And if you'd like to join us, we'll be back right after this.
Did you catch Eric Holder on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos? He said the president is planning a summit to study those who, quote, corrupt the Islamic faith to justify terrorism. But since it was Muhammad himself leading the slaughter of men, women, and children for not bowing to Allah back in the 7th century, I wonder if they might discover who corrupted it back then. It takes real effort to ignore the obvious, but it would seem our officials and many in the media make that effort. They can't see that those who take part in terrorist acts are following a straightforward interpretation of Muhammad's teachings and actions and all of the Quran. In a world of political correctness, Point of View Radio stands out. We seek the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and bring it to you daily. But we cannot be here without your support. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Edward Gilbreath with us today as we talk about Martin Luther King Day. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I've been talking, of course, also about the deaths of people like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Eric Gardner and others. And if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll get some of those phone calls in just a minute. But I thought, Ed, for just a minute, we might also talk about solutions, and one that has come forward by Dr. Tony Evans, who's been on the program as he's talked about his book, America Turning a Nation to God, was this idea of convening a solemn assembly of various churches and pastors. And I know he's going to Ferguson, Missouri, for example, to do that, to call for a time in which the church gathers together people of different denominations. There's a time of prayer and fasting, a time in which churches maybe adopt a local school or involved in community service, and recognizing that perhaps we are dealing with a problem simply because we have compromised with the culture, we've marginalized God, and we've shut out access to his transformational power. What about some of those attempts to begin to heal some of the rift that takes place in some of these communities by having the church step forward and do such acts of compassion as well as repentance?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's essential to any real holistic change, and I applaud Dr. Evans for being a proponent of that. And I would say that in many of our communities there are very important examples of that happening right now, where the church has taken a responsibility in their community to be an agent of change, and they've created after school programs and established relationships with their local schools, and have taken a leading voice in trying to bring together the different elements of a community. So I think that's essential. I think there are great models of it happening already. I think we need more. I think the civil rights movement is a great example. I mean, what we saw in Birmingham, what we saw in the Selma March, was an example of the church and the faith community coming together across denominations, across racial lines, to take a stand and to make a difference. I mean, the civil rights movement at heart was a church movement. One of the most unavoidable lessons, I believe, of Martin Luther King's campaign in Birmingham especially, was the centrality of prayer. The men and the women and the children of that movement met in churches. The songs they sang while they were marching were hymns and spirituals.
Yes.
They could not fathom a separation between their faith and the pursuit of justice. So, they prayed before they marched, they prayed while they marched, and they prayed after they marched. And oftentimes they prayed from their jail cells. So prayer was central to it, and I think the church has always been at the heart of an effective movement for justice, and we need to recapture that for sure.
Might just encourage people to go to your website, which we have a link there, and you've talked about some of the different books that you have written about, Reconciliation Blues, as well as Birmingham Revolution, if people would like to have you come and speak to that issue. And of course, I know your heart is to really build bridges across racial and cultural and ideological divides in this country. So certainly I would encourage all of you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and link up to Ed's website. Also, again, I do have a video that you can watch and, of course, information about some of his books. But let's take some phone calls along the way and get some of your comments. We'll start out in Georgia. Tony, what would you have to say to us today?
Hello, Kerby.
You're on the air.
Yes, appreciate you taking my call. Well, see, it's just that among the black community, my own people, is just that what I see the most is denial, accountability.
I guess I lost you there. Well, what about this issue of denial? Of course, the issue of accountability, but also the church has always been central to the African American community. It was central to the civil rights movement. What can maybe, Ed, the churches do in terms of some kind of outreach or encouraging proper behavior and maybe encouraging righteousness and justice in a community where sometimes that does not take place?
Yeah, absolutely. The church plays a role, and of course the church is the men, the women, the young people, and we need families that are willing to serve as role models, as visible examples of what taking responsibility could look like. And I think that's happening in many churches. I think it's true not only in the black church, but in other churches as well. That we fall short of living up to the call of righteousness and holiness that we should in all areas of our lives. And praise God, though, that there are those who are willing to help others, to lift them up, and to try to model what accountability and responsibility should look like. Ultimately, we need to help each other and lift each other up, and I think modeling that grace and that love and that community spirit in the church must be central to any real change. So I agree with
and what I was thinking also is, of course, you have, of course, the breakdown of the family, which began first in the African American community, now is happening in almost all the ethnic communities, and that's an issue, certainly. Another one that Alveda King brings up is the issue of abortion. She says when members of the pro-life black community tell the truth about abortion, the most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. We're accused of racism. Well, whether that's true or not, you've got to be concerned about this. I mean, we this week not only have Martin Luther King Day, but we also, of course, have Sanctity of Life and the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. And 1 out of every 5 babies is aborted in America, but 3 out of every 5 black babies is aborted. This is a concern. So the breakdown of the family, the loss of sanctity of life, these are very important lessons that I believe the church should speak to, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think I might take a slightly different view. You mentioned earlier that it started with the black community, the breakdown of the family. I would say it started with Adam and Eve. I think it started
that's
with,
true. Yeah.
I don't think it's anything new. I think, unfortunately, the African American family, from its very beginning, has been subjected to, being forcibly separated and divided, and the legacy of that, unfortunately, is seen today in the breakdown of our families and the pain in our communities. All that to say, I think all these things are connected in ways that we can't single out. The black community to say, they need to pay more attention to the number of abortions happening, or they are the case study in family breakdown. We are all connected, and the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow segregation, the legacy of the systemic injustice that divided our nation continues today. And that's one of the things that, if we're not honest with ourselves as a nation to examine our history and understand why things are the way they are, why communities are suffering such pain and damage, we're never going to make a change. We have to be honest with ourselves. We all have to take responsibility, Kerby, I believe, but we also have to be realistic about why things are the way they are. And we tend to forget history a lot. I think of a passage in Ecclesiastes that talks about, history just repeats itself, and not to be as cynical as the writers of Ecclesiastes, but, he said it has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is new. Sometimes people say, here is something new, but actually it is old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. And he takes that cynical view, but I think it's true. We tend to forget our history, and as a result, we continue to repeat it. And we find, communities and people to blame, and we hold these folks up as the reason why things are as bad as they are. But until we come together and, through a spirit of reconciliation, confront the pain and the brokenness in our communities, and not try to label any one community as being more responsible than another, we're never going to go far.
Well, and again, I think one of the issues of history, which we've talked about before, is the fact that we don't know our history. One of the reasons we wanted to talk today about the letter from the Birmingham jail. I bet if I took a microphone out past the studio and interviewed probably 20 people, I'm not sure I could find more than one or two, and that may be optimistic, that even know what I'm talking about. So that's why we're doing the program today, but we need to take a break, and we'll come back and take a few more phone calls. If you'd like to join us today, 1-800-351-1212. We need to learn our history. We need to know the good and the bad. And there have been some very dark chapters in American history. We've talked about that before. We'll talk about that with you and take some phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Kerby Gilbreath with us for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Pamela, you're joining the conversation. What would you like to share with us today?
Hello?
Yeah, we're on the air.
Oh, okay. Hey there. First and foremost, I just want to thank God for being the head of my life and for his son, the Holy Blood Covenant of Jesus Christ. With a thankful heart. And my first burden for global people. I know many are called, few are chosen, and I just pray that God's people will have the blinders taken off their eyes. And I really feel that we have an urgency to educate people about, the Illuminati and the new world, the one world order that they're trying to usher in.
Yeah, well, okay, that's a little off target. I mean, I'm glad to cover some of that, but that's today I just wanted to focus a little bit more on some of these issues, if you don't mind. We probably can cover that in the future, but let me take another phone call here. I'm going to go to Jacob. Jacob, what would you like to share with us today?
Kirby, how you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad I can join this. Kirby, sometimes I think we look at things that are going on within a culture from the wrong perspective. And the people that are involved in the day-to-day living of that culture will not come out and speak against the detrimental things that are going on in the culture.
Such as?
Therefore, a lot of people are looking at the surface, but not understanding what is really going on in the heart. And I'm making this point is that as a black man, African American, whatever I may, the world may look at me as, but I've been raised in this culture for 6 to 8 years. There is a silent war. There's a silent agreement against the white man. The white man is blamed for everything basically that is detrimental to blacks. And it is being taught to black children from birth all the way through, not only in the home, but it's been reinforced in the church. Black children, if the lights get turned off or if they can't get any food, they can't find a job, then white folk, the white man. Everything is blamed on the white man. And so what happened is that this child grows up thinking that the white race is their enemy. And then when they go to church, you got these biased preachers and pastors and evangelists that are always reinforcing these negatives about.
Let me give Ed a chance to join in. Ed, what would you think about some of this?
I would be cautious not to make blanket statements. I'm sure there's some truth in many situations where that does occur in families and the way folks are raised, and I could probably find examples of that myself, but. I also know, and I know from many of my white friends, that there are things taught in white families that are very condemning of black culture and of black people, and that sort of put them as the cause for all the bad things. So I'm not sure it's so much one universal thing as much as just the human nature, that the fallenness of man that causes us to want to find blame for certain things, but I wouldn't say it's exclusive to the African American community.
Jacob, I'll give you a final comment.
Yeah, well, there is blame. I had a very good friend of mine, and I want to cut it short. He was one of the greatest men, Millard Fuller's, who founded Habitat for Humanity. And that helped black people, everybody, everywhere. And him and I had a conversation. I told him, sometime if you take ghettoism and mix it with what black culture is supposed to be, you look at it from the wrong perspective. Now, I know what is taught. And I know basically from nation to nation, I can go from California to New York to Florida, and the one word that will bring blacks into unity is the white folks. And these are some words that are being trained and taught up. When you meet the average young black boy or girl out there, they're not looking at the white person as a equal or someone that they can really relate to. They're looking at them as their enemy.
Okay. Any final comments, Ed? I wanted to give you a chance to respond, because it seems to me that if there's going to be any racial reconciliation, whatever divisions on either side need to be mediated, and I believe that the church is the mechanism, perhaps the only mechanism by which that could take place.
I am in agreement with you there, Kerby. And I don't know if I'd have anything to add, but with all due respect, I think it's difficult to make a statement about an entire community and not take into account the fact that we are not a homogeneous, monolithic thing, but there's lots of differences of view and opinion and of perspective that occur in the black community.
You know, one of the things that I have encouraged people to do with my commentary today is to read the letter from the Birmingham jail. And you were talking about the fact that we don't know our history. I would think that for a lot of young people that maybe when they even hear the words Jim Crow South, they don't even know what that is. I mean, their only connection with that might be an occasional movie that they see or a documentary. I think Dr. King did a very good job of reminding us of what it was like to live in the South in 1963, what it was like to live in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. So there's one way to learn our history, but it's a second, I think, great opportunity to see how a man who was trying to apply his understanding of Christian faith to one of the great social ills of our day. So if I can make that assignment, I think you would agree that taking the time to read those 7,000 words would be a project well spent today.
Absolutely. I would echo that, Kerby. And Dr. King was definitely a human being, a flawed man like all of us, but a man who God used to frame a situation and a movement that really the church can gain a lot from reflecting on today. So thank you so much for taking the time to call attention to the letter.
I might also call attention to your book, about 170, 180 pages, Birmingham Revolution. It is published by InterVarsity Press. Of course, your also earlier book, Reconciliation Blues, we have information about that, and people can go to your website to order it. And I really do encourage some of our listeners to take the time to read deeply. Martin Luther King Jr. brought a lot to the table, and today there is such a sort of bumper sticker, Twitter kind of mindset, and to really deeply look into some of these issues and to investigate those and follow the logic and to understand our history would benefit tremendously. So, Ed, I appreciate you writing those books, and I appreciate you, as always, joining us here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me again, Kerby, and I look forward to visiting with you again someday.
Let's do it. We need to take a break, and we're out of time today. If you were with us in the first hour, we had a chance to talk with Joel Rosenberg about his new book. It's just out, and I think you really will want to read it, The Third Target. And, of course, we've mentioned two of the books by Ed that I think would be great reading, and most importantly, I'd really encourage you to take the time to read the letter from the Birmingham jail and to learn a little bit more about our history. I want to thank everyone who's been a part of the broadcast today, Andrew and Catherine and Chris, as well as Matthew for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone or write a check or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.